In 1922, when Howard Carter first peered through a tiny hole into the tomb of King Tutankhamun, he was asked if he could see anything. His famous reply was, "Yes, wonderful things." For nearly a century, those wonderful things, the gold masks, the chariots, the exquisite jewelry, defined our understanding of the boy king. But even with all that treasure, the man himself remained a mystery. Who was he really? Why did he pass away so young? Who were his parents? Using statues and ancient inscriptions that were often damaged or intentionally erased by later kings. But in the last few years, the golden mask has been set aside to let the molecules speak. Recent DNA analysis performed on the mummy of Tutankhamun has revealed a truth so complex and so unexpected that it has fundamentally rewritten the history of the 18th dynasty. This isn't just a story about ancient royalty. It is a forensic journey into the heart of a family whose secrets were locked away in their very cells for over 3,000 years. To appreciate the gravity of these DNA findings, we have to understand the era Tutankhamun lived in. The 18th dynasty was the peak of Egyptian power, but it was also a time of massive religious upheaval. His predecessor, Akhenaten, had upended centuries of tradition by declaring there was only one god, the Aten. This heretic king moved the capital and changed the art style of Egypt to something strange and elongated. When Tutankhamun took the throne at just 9 years old, he was tasked with fixing the broken pieces of a divided nation. Because of the political chaos of the time, the records were scrubbed, names were removed from monuments. For a long time, we weren't even sure if Akhenaten was Tutankhamun's father or perhaps an older brother. The family tree was a jungle of question marks. Zahi Hawass and international geneticists began the most ambitious ancient DNA project in history. They didn't just test Tutankhamun. They tested 16 other mummies from the same period to see how they were related. This was incredibly difficult work. Ancient DNA is fragile. It breaks down over thousands of years, especially in the heat of Egypt. Many critics thought it was impossible to get a clean sample from mummies that had been treated with embalming chemicals and exposed to the elements. But using a process called microsatellite analysis, the team was able to extract the genetic fingerprints of these ancient rulers. The first major revelation from the DNA results concerned Tutankhamun's father. For years, there was a fierce debate. Was his father the warrior king Amenhotep III? Or was it the revolutionary Akhenaten? The DNA provided a definitive answer. By comparing the markers on the Y chromosome, which is passed from father to son, they found a perfect match between Tutankhamun and a mummy, known as KV-55. Archaeologists had long suspected KV-55 was Akhenaten, but the DNA confirmed it with 99.9% certainty. Tutankhamun was the son of the most controversial man in Egyptian history. This changed everything. It meant that his entire reign was a delicate act of distancing himself from his father's radical legacy, while still maintaining the royal bloodline. But if the father was a surprise, the identity of the mother sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Popular history had long suggested that Tutankhamun's mother was the famous Nefertiti, renowned for her beauty. Others suggested a secondary wife named Kia, but the DNA told a much more complicated, and frankly, startling story. The researchers analyzed a mummy known as the Younger Lady, found in a hidden chamber in the tomb of Amenhotep II. The DNA showed that this woman was not only the mother of Tutankhamun, but was also the full sister of his father, Akhenaten. In modern terms, this is a realization that challenges our perceptions. However, in the context of ancient Egyptian royalty, it was a deliberate strategy. The pharaohs believed they were living gods, to keep the divine blood pure, and to prevent rival families from claiming the throne. They often married within the family. While we knew this happened, the DNA showed just how extreme it was in Tutankhamun's case. He was the product of a direct sibling union. This genetic reality had a profound impact on his health, his life, and the physical characteristics that had puzzled Egyptologists for decades. Some historians theorized he had a condition called Marfan syndrome or other hormonal disorders. But the DNA and subsequent CT scans provided a more grounded explanation. Tutankhamun didn't have a rare hormonal disease. Instead, he suffered from a mountain of genetic burdens caused by generations of inbreeding. The DNA revealed he had a club foot, a condition known as Kohler disease which causes bone tissue to deteriorate, and a severely cleft palate. This explains a peculiar detail in his tomb that had long been overlooked. Archaeologists found over 130 walking sticks buried with him. Previously, these were thought to be symbols of power, but the DNA tells us they were functional. The boy king wasn't a robust golden warrior riding his chariot into battle as seen on the carved chests in his tomb. In reality, he likely struggled to walk and needed assistance to move around his palace. This paints a much more human and sympathetic picture of the young ruler. He was a teenager doing his best to lead an empire while dealing with chronic pain and physical limitations. The DNA study also tackled the biggest question of all: why did he pass away at the age of 19? Theories ranged from a fall from a chariot to a blow to the back of the head, suggesting foul play. But the genetic analysis found a hidden enemy in his blood. Tutankhamun was infected with Plasmodium falciparum, the parasite that causes the most severe form of malaria. In fact, the researchers found multiple strains of the parasite in his system. This discovery was a landmark in paleopathology. It was the first time malaria had been genetically identified in the New Kingdom royal family. It suggests that while the king was already physically weakened by his bone conditions, he was hit by a massive infection that his immune system simply couldn't handle. It wasn't a grand conspiracy or an act of violence that ended his life. It was a tiny mosquito. This revelation brings the ancient world into a relatable light. Even with all the gold in the world and the status of a living god, he was still vulnerable to the same natural forces that affect us today. The DNA work didn't stop with Tutankhamun. The team also investigated the mummified remains of 2 fetuses found in his tomb. These had been a mystery since Carter discovered them. Were they symbolic additions, or were they his children? The genetic results were clear. They were his daughters. Both were stillborn, likely as a result of the same genetic complications that plagued their father. This adds a layer of immense tragedy to the story of Tutankhamun. He was the last of his line. He tried to produce an heir to keep the 18th dynasty alive, but the very biological strategy used to protect their divinity inbreeding ultimately led to the family's extinction. When he passed away, his line ended with him. The success of this DNA project has completely changed the way Egyptologists work. We used to rely on stylistic dating or the feeling of a statue. Now, we have a biological ledger. We can see the migration of genes across the Nile Valley. For example, the DNA showed that the royal family had a genetic heritage that linked them deeply to the indigenous populations of the region, settling long-standing debates about the origins of the pharaohs. They were truly the children of the Nile. One of the most fascinating aftermath stories of the DNA era is how it has allowed us to identify nameless mummies. For decades, many royal mummies sat in the Cairo Museum labeled only by the room they were found in. Through genetic triangulation, comparing the DNA of known kings with these unidentified remains, we have been able to put names back to faces. We now know where Queen Tut's grandmother was buried. We found his grandfather, Amenhotep III. We are essentially rebuilding an ancient family reunion that has been broken for 3,000 years. But why does this matter to us today? It matters because it humanizes history. When we see the gold mask, we see a symbol. When we see the DNA results, we see a person. We see a boy who had a favorite walking stick. The DNA has stripped away the myth and given us the truth. There is also a significant scientific lesson in the Tutankhamun study regarding the resilience of information. Even after 3 millennia of heat, humidity, and the process of mummification, which involves salts and resins that usually destroy DNA, the fundamental code of life survived. It shows that our biological data is far more durable than the stones we carve our names into. The pyramids may crumble, but the sequence of G, 2, and C in our cells tells a story that can be recovered if you have the right tools. The shock of the DNA results also forced experts to reconsider Egyptian art. If Tutankhamun had a club foot and a cleft palate, why did the art show him as a perfect, idealized figure? It reminds us that ancient Egyptian art wasn't photography. It was propaganda. It was meant to show the eternal, perfect version of the king. By comparing the DNA to the statues, we can finally see the gap between the myth and the reality. It makes us wonder what other historical figures looked like behind their official portraits. The medical insights gained from Tut's DNA also help modern research. By studying how the malaria parasite affected ancient humans, scientists can better understand the evolution of the disease. It provides a 3,000-year-old baseline for how our immune systems have changed. Ancient DNA isn't just about the past. It's a data set for the future of medicine. We also have to talk about the ethical and social impact of these discoveries. In Egypt, these results are a source of immense national pride. They connect the modern people of Egypt directly to their illustrious past with scientific proof. It's a bridge across time. The study of King Tut's DNA has spurred a new generation of Egyptian scientists to take the lead in their own history, moving away from the colonial-era archaeology of the past toward a high-tech, domestic scientific future. The insane part of this, as some might call it, is how much we almost missed. If those two fetuses hadn't been tested, we would never have known the personal heartbreak of Tutankhamun. If the younger lady hadn't been tested, we would still be arguing about whether Nefertiti was his mother. The DNA acted like a light in a dark room, suddenly showing us the walls and the furniture where before we could only feel around in the dark. Interestingly, the DNA results have also sparked new debates, arguing that contamination from modern people could skew the results. This has pushed the field of ancient DNA to develop even stricter protocols, making the science more robust than ever. Today, the study of Tutankhamun's DNA is considered the gold standard for how to handle ancient remains. It has established the rules for how we will eventually test the mummies of Ramses the Great or the lost Queen Nefertiti, if she is ever found. What's truly incredible is the scale of the information. We aren't just looking at Tut's family. We are looking at the health profile of an entire era. We found that the royal family was plagued by parasitic infections. This tells us about the environment of the Nile Valley 3,000 years ago. It was a place of great beauty and power, but also a place of significant biological challenge. It reshapes our view of the extravagant lifestyles of the pharaohs. They may have had gold, but they didn't have antibiotics. They didn't have clean water systems that could protect them from parasites. In many ways, a modern person with a basic medicine cabinet has a higher quality of life than the king of Egypt did. The DNA also revealed that Tutankhamun had a slightly elongated head, a trait shared by his father and grandmother. This was long thought to be an artistic style or a result of head binding, but the DNA suggests it was a natural hereditary trait. This shows us that the strange art of the Amarna period, while exaggerated, had a basis in the actual physical appearance of the royal family. They really did look different from the average Egyptian, which likely helped reinforce their claim that they were a different, divine species. As we look at the aftermath of these discoveries, we see a trend towards molecular history. History is no longer just for the people who like to read old scrolls. It is for the biologists, the chemists, and the doctors. The tomb of King Tut has become a laboratory, and every time a new technology is developed, we can go back to the samples and ask new questions. Maybe in 10 years we will be able to tell what his last meal was, or exactly what the climate was like on the day he passed away, all from the tiny fragments of his biological material. One of the most touching things revealed by the broader study was the relationship between Tutankhamun and his grandmother, Queen Ta. The DNA confirmed that a lock of hair found in Tut's tomb belonged to her. He clearly loved her. Even after she passed away, he kept a piece of her with him, and eventually, it was buried with him to accompany him into the afterlife. These are the details that DNA can give us. Details of affection and memory that inscriptions on a wall can never truly capture. The story of the DNA analysis is also a story of international cooperation. Samples were tested in Cairo, but the data was analyzed by experts around the world. It shows that King Tut is not just the property of one country or one group of scientists. He is a part of the human story. The fascination with him continues because he is a mirror for ourselves. Through his DNA, we see our own vulnerabilities, our own family complexities, and our own mortality. It was the shock of realization that our high-tech world can finally speak to the ancient world. For centuries, the mummies were just things, family histories and genetic legacies. You can now look through the gold. You can imagine the boy with the walking stick, the king with the aching foot, and the young man who was just a person, trying to survive in a world of gods and monsters. The genetic burden that ended the 18th dynasty is a powerful metaphor for the dangers of isolation. By trying to be too pure, the family became too fragile. It's a biological lesson that applies to all of life. Diversity is strength. The pharaonic attempt to stay separate from the rest of humanity was their downfall. It reminds us that no matter how much gold we have, we are all part of the same biological tapestry. and we need each other to thrive. The DNA revealed that Tutankhamun was a mix of many different ancestral lines from within the Nile Valley and the surrounding regions. This shows that even the divine kings were a product of thousands of years of human movement. Ancient Egypt was a crossroads of the world. It was a place where Africa, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean met. The DNA proves that this mixture of people was what created the incredible energy and innovation of the Egyptian empire. As the years go by, the data from the 2010 DNA study continues to be analyzed. New software and new genetic models are being applied to those old sequences. We are finding even more subtle details about his immune system and his ancestry. It's the gift that keeps on giving. King Tutankhamun has become the most studied human being in history, not because of his gold, but because of his genes. The impact on the tourism industry in Egypt has also been massive. People don't just want to see the tomb, they want to hear the story. They want to know the true history of the boy king. This has led to a reimagining of museum displays, where biological information is presented alongside the artifacts. It makes the experience of visiting Egypt much more immersive and educational. You aren't just looking at the past, you are learning about the biology of a civilization. The DNA work has also cleared up the mystery of Akhenaten's appearance. For a long time, because of the art, people thought Akhenaten was a woman or had a genetic deformity that made him look feminine. But the DNA showed he was biologically male, and did not have the suspected deformities. The strange art was a choice, a religious and political statement to show the king as a being that transcended gender, a creator god in human form. This settles a century-old debate. Akhenaten's look was a brand, not a medical condition. The aftermath of the DNA findings 13 years later is a world where we can no longer hide behind myths. The truth is out there, written in the bones. It has made the study of ancient Egypt more rigorous, more scientific, and ultimately more respectful. We are treating these mummies as ancestors, not as curiosities. We are asking their permission through science to tell their story. When the results were first published, the world was stunned. The headlines spoke of incest and malaria. But as the dust settled, the story became one of resilience. Tutankhamun lived nearly 2 decades in a body that was constantly fighting itself and the environment around it. That is a kind of bravery that doesn't get recorded on the walls of a temple. It sets a story of a young man who kept going, who kept his empire together, and who died as a king. Looking forward, the next step is to find the lost mummies of the rest of the family. We are still missing Nefertiti. We are still missing many of the princesses. With the genetic map we have created from Tutankhamun, we now have the key to find them. If a new mummy is found in the Valley of the Kings, we can check its DNA against Tu's. If it's a match, we can say this is your mother, or this is your sister. We have the family's biological signature. The DNA of King Tut has also given us a new perspective on the concept of identity. Was he defined by his father's heresy or his own restoration of the gods? Was he defined by his disabilities or his royal status? The DNA says he was all of those things. He was a complex, multi-layered person, just like any of us. He was a son, a husband, a father, and a pharaoh. He carried the weight of an empire, and the weight of his own DNA. The mystery of Tutankhamun's cleft palate also gives us a glimpse into ancient medicine. There is no evidence of surgery, but there are ancient texts that talk about treatments for speech and healing. We have to wonder how his condition affected his ability to speak in public or perform his duties. It adds a whole new dimension to the boy king's life. Did he have a speech impediment? Did people treat him differently because of it? These are the human questions that make history come alive. The study of his daughter's remains is perhaps the most profound part of the DNA project. It reminds us that even 3,000 years ago, the loss of a child was a devastating blow. The fact that he had them mummified with the same care as a pharaoh and placed in his own tomb shows the depth of his grief. They are a silent testament to a father's love. The DNA didn't just find a relationship, it found a story of loss and memory. The aftermath of this scientific breakthrough is a more honest, grounded, and fascinating history of ancient Egypt. Tutankhamun's DNA has revealed that the greatest treasure in his tomb wasn't the gold mask or the jewelry, it was the king himself, finally speaking to us across the ages through the language of life. The DNA results have also shifted how we view the end of the 18th dynasty. It wasn't just a political collapse, it was a biological one. The family literally ran out of life. This provides a clear explanation for why the throne eventually passed to Horemheb, a general who was not related to the royal family. The gods had died out, and a human had to take over. This is a much more logical and evidence-based way to understand the transition of power. The story of Tutankhamun's DNA is a reminder that we are never truly finished with history. New tools will always bring new truths. What we think we know today might be changed by a single discovery tomorrow. It keeps us curious. It keeps us searching. And it keeps King Tutankhamun, the boy king who lived 3,000 years ago, very much alive in our modern imagination. As we conclude this exploration, think about the journey that DNA took. It began in a cell in a young man's body in ancient Thebes. It survived the collapse of an empire, the burying of a tomb, and the passage of 30 centuries. It survived being unwrapped in 1925 and decades of being handled by researchers. And finally, in a modern lab, it was decoded to tell the world who he was. That is the true magic of King Tutankhamun. He isn't just a king from the past. He is a part of our present, teaching us about biology, about history, and about what it means to be human. The gold mask may be what draws us in, but the DNA is what makes us stay. It's the ultimate reveal, and it has changed Egyptology forever. Tutankhamun is no longer just a name on a sarcophagus. He is a person we can finally understand. And that is the most wonderful thing of all.